I'm not sure if he's actually built something similar at Tottenham's training ground, but I'm sure there will be something there that's not too far off. I mean, obviously, what Tottenham fans will be interested in, and what's the most important part of that is actually his knowledge. I mean, it's all well and good having the black box and having the facilities to be able to put any player up on screen and show a panel of people, highlights of that guy doing the best he possibly can, and all his stats and where he's been successful and where he hasn't, and all the information on him. That's one thing, but it's the knowledge that Mitchell brings that's the most important thing. Is that, make no mistake, that every single player he has in that particular black box, shall we say, he will have in his mind at the same time. So,
let me ask you this based on that. You look at a team like Southampton, and we've already touched on Leicester and Swansea, and you have another team like Southampton that has this kind of technology, and maybe those other two clubs are using something similar. At least their recruitment strategies are very solid. It allows those clubs to punch above their weight in terms of financially. We hear so much about, well, Spurs are a fifth place financially, and so they're going to finish fifth or sixth every year anyway, because that's where they should fall financially. Whereas you have these other teams, and you can probably include Crystal Palace in there as well, that punch way above their financial weight in terms of where they end up in the table at the end of the season. Yeah. Is that something that possibly Tottenham are looking at, to where they know that they're never going to be one of the big financial four, but will it allow them to punch above their weight if they have this kind of technology in their hip pocket?
Well, Tottenham don't feel like they can be one of these top financial four or top financial five, if you count Liverpool, at the moment. And I think that's something that supporters have got to understand, is that, even though Daniel said, I think in a statement not too long ago, that the transfer budget wouldn't be impacted by the new stadium build, I mean, it is, and it has been, and there's no real way of beating around the bush on that one. I think Arsenal are a good example of that, is that the cost of building a new stadium is a massive one, and it's going to impact on your capacity to be able to blow huge sums of money on players where other teams can. And so I think for the moment, Tottenham have obviously realised that they can't compete in that top bracket. They can't compete for those best players, so they might as well not waste time trying. And I completely understand why they might think that. So they've obviously gone a different route, and they've gone this route that every other club who has got a good chairman and is thinking dynamically and thinking progressively about the game and forward thinking about the game, of installing scouts who are progressive, who are open-minded, who are thinking about different ways they can do things, how they can find a way round instead of finding a way through into that top four. Do you see what I mean? Rather than bludgeoning your way in by spending as much money as possible, as Manchester City perhaps did however many years ago. These clubs have got to think about a way round.
Right.
They've got to think about a more intelligent way of getting around that. And one of those ways is by scouting players on a more intelligent level than the top clubs might do. Because obviously the top clubs, they've got the financial muscle to be able to buy whoever they want. And they might buy somebody who's a fantastic player, but they might buy somebody who doesn't cut it in England, who doesn't adjust to life in England, or who doesn't adjust to life to the particular town they are in England. And it really can come down to that. So it's very much part of Tottenham's thinking, and part of their thinking, bringing in Paul Mitchell, bringing in Rob McKenzie, who was very successful at Leicester. I mean, Leicester are doing a fantastic job in the Premier League, and Rob McKenzie played his part in that in terms of scouting players. I mean, he scouted Mahrez, for example, and brought him to the club, and he's been very successful there. Aloa is another player that he was he played a hand in, and he's another successful one at Leicester. So, and also they've also brought in David Webb from Bournemouth. So, and Bournemouth have obviously been fantastically successful as well. One of the stories of the last however many years,
Right.
A notoriously lower league club that was wandered the bottom two tiers of English football for decades, and they've decided, well, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to find a way to get up there. We're going to find a way round, rather than bludgeoning our way through, because we know we're not going to have the financial might. So we might as well find an intelligent way of doing things, and they have. Leicester have, Southampton have, and I think it should be a positive thing, and it should be an encouraging thing to Tottenham fans that Daniel Levy has spotted this. He's noticed this. He's taken it on board, and not only has he taken it on board, but he's taken it as far as hiring 3 of the best guys in the industry,
Right.
to do his recruiting, and to actually target the players and draw up a list of of players that can come into Tottenham and make Tottenham into a successful team. Because, you know, for all the criticism of Daniel Levy over the years, and I've been critical of him many, many times, and, you know, if I spot reason to be critical of him, then I definitely will be. You can be assured of that. But he has really tried very, very hard to find a way of breaking the club into the top four, and I think the fact that he's hired Pochettino, but also moreover the fact that he's hired Mitchell and McKenzie and Webb to do the recruitment, and that he's taking that as seriously as bringing those guys in.
Ian Broomfield as well, correct?
And yes, Ian's back. He's a scout as well. And go on, continue.
Sorry. No, I just think this is enlightening, because I think this is what Spurs fans want to hear. They want to be assured that as we progress to going up the financial ladder with the new stadium, there is a plan in place to bridge that gap. And as much as that process is good for the league with other teams, the Swanseas, Leicesters, the Palaces, and it makes it very competitive, which is the draw and the global appeal of the brand, particularly in countries like the US, where with NBC's coverage it's been fantastic the last few years, and it's really helped grow football in this country as well as Tottenham's presence. But I digress. I think this is encouraging for everyone and will really put us on a platform where we need to be. So very enlightening. Thanks for that.
No problem. But I mean, what I will stress is this: it's not going to be without its teething problems. I mean, people have to realise that, as I said before, you know, Mitchell only began work in earnest in January. Rob McKenzie and David Webb only really began work in earnest this summer. So, I mean, if people have complaints about the fact that Tottenham didn't have as many targets as perhaps other clubs did, or perhaps perhaps some people might want them to have, is that, well, really, over the last 6 months or even less than that, you know, conversations have been very much about which players they actually have a chance of getting now, and which players they've had the resources to actually do the homework on. You know, it's all well and good Mitchell coming in with a huge data bank of players that he knows and he likes and he rates and he can see fitting in, but he has to agree with many more people than just himself. You know, that involves conversations with Pochettino, that involves conversations with Daniel Levy, it involves conversations with many people of the club about who do Tottenham actually really need at this point. You know, what are the right deals that they can do? And I think the important thing to stress is what are the right deals that they can do for the future, you know, not just for the present. They're obviously thinking about how can they improve the team for the new season, how can they make sure that Tottenham at least have the capacity to finish the same position as they did last year, because rest assured the teams below them will be improving. So it's obviously been very important that Tottenham improve in the now, and I think the first thing that they addressed, the biggest problem they had last year was defensively. The biggest problem they had was on the right side of the fence, where they were exposed many, many, many times and lost many, many, many games. And the first thing they did was address that problem by bringing in Kieran Trippier, bringing in Toby Alderweireld, who's a right-footed, right-sided centre-half, and also Kevin Wimmer, who's another person, left-footed centre-half, who can compete with Jan Vertonghen for that position, and strengthen Tottenham's back forward, stop them conceding goals, and you know, that's the weakness that I saw in Tottenham last year. That's the first thing that I thought they would address. It's the first thing that they did address. It's the thing that Pochettino has pointed out that they did address recently as well. And I think that was very much about the here and now. That was very much the issue that they had to sort now, because Tottenham scored a lot of goals last year, but they also conceded far too many as well, and that's one of the reasons why they ended up fifth and not fourth. And also, you have to give the capacity of the forward players to improve, because so many of them are young. You know, going out and buying new players is not always a solution. And obviously Pochettino and many other people have seen the capacity of Tottenham's forward players to improve. And that's very much what they're expecting them to do. So I think going out and buying new forward players was less of a priority than strengthening the defence, which is why the defence was strengthened first. Apart from Danny Ings, which is obviously an opportunity they saw because he was about to become a free transfer. And then the forward options were looked at. Now, if anybody has complaints about the fact that there weren't enough forward targets to be looked at, well, okay, but you have to give Mitchell time and Rob McKenzie time and David Webb time to actually go and watch some players. And, you know, having had the meetings with Pochettino and with Levy about what kind of players Tottenham really need now and for the future, and then giving them a chance to go out and watch these players and actually do their homework on these players, because it takes time, it takes resources.
So, Lyall, to wrap this part of our discussion up, is it safe to say that since you've been on the Spurs beat, that this is the most disciplined that the club has been in terms of its approach to evaluate and bring in the players that we need at sensible prices? Is that a fair way to wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, like you say, to wrap it up, it's hard to wrap something up in such a small time.
And it's not perfect, as you said. I mean, there's going to be hiccups along the way, but does it seem like to you that the infrastructure in place appears to be as sound as it's been in your memory?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, sound is one word. I mean, very encouraging and very exciting, to use other words as well. I mean, talking to contacts not just around Spurs, but generally in the game, Paul Mitchell is incredibly highly thought of in the game. And he was considered a real coup behind the scenes for Tottenham to get him. And it's hard to be able to convey that to supporters. It's hard to be able to convey how important in the modern game a head of recruitment is. I mean, because the game's changing so much. And obviously, people are very concerned about players, and they're very concerned about wanting to know what's going on the field at all times. So, journalists don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to convey that at all times. But if I can convey that now, I mean, I cannot stress highly enough how much of a coup it is considered in the game that Paul Mitchell works for Tottenham.
Terrific.
That's good. So you talked about the defence that was addressed. We've obviously deliberated at length about the forward options, but we've seen the experiment going on with the central defensive midfield position. We've seen Dyer. We lauded his performance last week on the show, and it was well deserved. But I'm not entirely convinced it's the finished article. What do you think should be done there? I know we moved for Axel Witsel at the last minute. That didn't work out, so there was still something going on that says we're not sure what we're doing here. Or do you think Poch has a clearly defined plan for that role?
Well, I think Pochettino definitely has a clearly defined plan for that role, and I think Dyer fits into that. Even if they did bring in another central midfield player, I mean, they asked St. Petersburg about the possibility of signing Witsel because Witsel's agent made it known that he was available or potentially available, or at least hoped he would be available, and it turned out that he wasn't for any less than his £75 million buyout clause. So that was an option, or at least it was an option that was very, very loosely explored, but I wouldn't go anywhere further than that, really, as far as making him a priority target. I mean, as much as you have targets, you have to think on your feet at the same time, and when a certain player comes along that you probably didn't know was available before, and he suddenly becomes potentially available, it wouldn't be right for the club not to explore that. I'm sure you guys can agree.
Sure.
But in terms of the defensive midfield role, like any role, it's about signing the right player, not just any player. So you have to try and get in the mind of the manager and get into Pochettino's mindset. The versatility that's in his mindset, that actually he's thinking, well, there are a number of options here that I'd be happy with, not just a first option that I'd be very happy with, a second option that I'd be kind of happy with, and a third option that I'd be satisfied with. I don't think that's the way he thinks. I think positionally he looks at it and thinks, well, there are a number of options here that I'd be happy with. One of those options is Eric Dyer playing in that position and training him to play that position, and I think he's very much got the potential to, like you say, be very successful in that position. And I agree with you, he's not the finished article yet. Of course he's not. I mean, he's got all the technical attributes to be very good there, but he doesn't have the brain to be good there yet, if you see what I mean. He doesn't have the brain of a central midfielder yet. He has the brain of a central defender. And that's what takes time, is to get him thinking differently. But if the opportunity is there for them to also sign a player that could not only be very good in that position, but could also help Eric Dyer in that position. So if you look at someone like Axel Witsel, who's exceptionally good in that position, he could have helped bring Dyer along. And if you look at Victor Wanyama, for example, who's another one the club that Tottenham wanted to get, he's another player who could have brought Dyer along in that position. And so eventually you reach a point where you have two players who are learning from each other and working together and have a good relationship with each other, wanting the best for that position, because again, that's another important thing for a successful team, is to have two players not only competing for one position, but two players that help each other compete for that position. I mean,